Howdy doody folks, and welcome back to my journey across the United States, where every state has a story. In New Jersey, you've got some certified bangers. From a winged creature that flies through your skies, to a thread that hangs out of them, to an array of Cold War-era missiles that make things in the sky go boom. You've got it all, and much, much more. Now, before we jump in though, a quick favor. If you enjoy these deep dives into America's strangest tales, dropping a comment and a like, and hitting that subscribe button like it just asked you. Hey New Jersey, if you're the garden state, where are all your gardens? This will help me out more than anything as I struggle my way up this hill towards 100,000 subscribers in 2025. It'll never cost you a dime either, and it's a quick way to say, hey YouTube, this guy's alright. Anyways, with that, let's get into the video. When many think New Jersey, they think Newark, Trenton, or the expansive highways that run through the state between New York and Philadelphia. But these thoughts of the state neglect a quieter, perhaps more mysterious portion of the state to the south known as the Pine Barrens. There are countless tales of creatures that dwell in those parts, but perhaps none of them are as famous or maybe infamous as the Jersey Devil. There are many origin stories for this creature, which has come to be described as some amalgamation of creatures, really, with a goat-like head, hooves like a goat or horse, bat-like wings, a tail like that of a wyvern, and small stubby arms out front, maybe like a T-Rex. But the most popular origin story is that stems from a tale independently known as the Tale of Mother Leeds. This Tale of Mother Leeds is the story of one Jane Leeds, a woman who lived in the Pine Barrens in the 1700s. This woman had given birth to 12 children, and it's said that when she found out she was pregnant for the 13th time, she yelled out in frustration that this child would be the devil. Sure enough, in 1735, when Jane Leeds went into labor again, it was no normal night. A storm was brewing in the area, and surrounded by friends and family, what was immediately born a normal child quickly transformed into a beast of some sort, flying away from its mother without even a thank you, and flying up and out of the chimney and into the forest surrounding the home of Jane Leeds. Now, some tales say that this creature was born as a beast because Jane herself was a witch, or a plot twist because her husband was actually the devil himself, which does sort of sound like the kind of thing you'd hear in an 18th century marital dispute. Regardless, there are even rumors that there have been attempts to exorcise the Pine Barrens following this event. But apparently these exorcisms didn't work if first-hand accounts of this creature are to be believed. Also, question for those of you that are out there that are more familiar with exorcisms than I am, can you exorcise an entire region, like the whole Pine Barrens? I guess I'm asking for a friend. Regardless, it isn't just random townsfolk that have claimed to see this creature. Many of the most notable sightings of the Jersey Devil were actually by well-known individuals. For instance, Stephen Decatur, a U.S. naval officer and commodore, claimed to observe a flying creature near a place called Hanover Mill Works, and he even reported hitting it with a cannonball to no effect. Likely, Stephen Decatur, likely. If I get a time machine, I'm going to go back and see if you really did hit that shot, because I smell a dirty liar. Even more famous, at least in name, is a run-in with the Jersey Devil that supposedly occurred in 1820, told by one Joseph Bonaparte. Yes, that's right, the older brother of Napoleon Bonaparte, who claimed that while hunting in Bordentown Estate, a town near modern-day Trenton, that he actually saw the Jersey Devil. Additionally, sort of like UFO mythology today, the Jersey Devil has been blamed for the killing of livestock in the region, with many instances of this being reported in the 1840s. Even as recently as the 1900s, there have been sightings of this creature. In 1909, for instance, a rash of sightings was published in newspapers across southern New Jersey and Philadelphia, claiming that an unknown creature had been attacking trolleys, fighting police in Camden and Bristol, Pennsylvania, and even eliciting such a response that some schools in the region closed and some workers in the area were told to stay home. This rash of sightings even prompted the Philadelphia Zoo to offer a $10,000 reward for someone to capture this Jersey Devil. Now, all of this hustle and bustle about a really weird creature has obviously prompted folks to wonder if it is indeed real. You could, of course, throw your hands in the air and say that this is all an imaginary story of a winged boogeyman with some religious undertones, or a wives' tale invented to keep folks out of the Pine Barrens that were historically a fairly dangerous place to be, filled with criminals and unsavory folks. Now, you would be somewhat right in that train of thought, but the truth of the matter has far more depth than that. See, the Leeds family, or the supposed family of the woman that actually gave birth to the supposed Jersey Devil, might actually be real, or folks at least believe that the name Leeds is referring to a real group of individuals. Some point to one real-life individual, Deborah Leeds, as being the true face behind the Leeds mythology. For proof, they point to the fact that her husband, in 1736, named 12 children in his will, which fits this urban legend eerily well. There's also theories that are perhaps more plausible that the Jersey Devil is just a story which was spread during religio-political disputes. If you look to the 1600s and 1700s, there was an almanac publisher and politician, Daniel Leeds, and his son, Tyden Leeds. See, these two, in particular the elder Daniel, produced a rival almanac to Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac, which was a bit of a hoodoo voodoo or astrology-driven attempt at predicting the weather. Because of this, not only were Daniel and Tyden goofed on by Benjamin Franklin throughout the years, but the two were often described as monsters, and were sometimes individually described as the Leeds Devil. To summarize, this was basically 18th century Twitter drama playing out in newspapers. Really good stuff. This theory even almost gets the number of children right, as Daniel Leeds' first wife had given birth to 9 children. Okay, I guess 9 is a bit far off from 13, but frankly, if I were their father, I might lose count at that point anyways. Heck, this family is even the one behind the naming of New Jersey's Leeds Point, one of the areas that is most often associated with sightings of the Jersey Devil. If you need more proof, the Leeds family crest, which was widely popularized on their almanac, even depicts a wyvern, a sort of bat-like winged dragon on it. You can't make this stuff up, folks. Truth is stranger than fiction, and the amalgamation of truth and fiction is often extremely ironic. So, while I'll admit that I've had folks comment on this very channel that they'd seen the Jersey Devil themselves, I'm inclined to believe that even if there is something winged, dangerous, and suspicious flying through the skies of New Jersey, it at the very least obtained its literary origin story from these tales of the Leeds family. Regardless, I'd love to hear what you think. Is the Jersey Devil real? Is it made up? Is it a product of a dispute between old Benjamin Franklin and a semi-modern astrologer? Let me know in the comments. So, not to hype this story up too much, but my introduction to the tale of the Hoboken Monkey Man was by my friend who went to Stevens, telling me that back in the day, in the 80s, a special task force was assembled by the Hoboken Police Department to deal with mounting fears over a Bigfoot-like creature across the river from literal Manhattan. Yeah, that sort of rumor is all I needed to hear to give this story a good look. So in our discussion of this so-called Monkey Man, let's first start with the urban legend itself. It's said that in the early 1980s, police officers in Hoboken started getting strange phone calls. It started with a concerned mother reporting a peeping Tom peering into her child's window, leaving behind evidence in the form of handprints just outside of the child's room. The thing is, though, these handprints were massive for a person, and below them on the ground, unseen by the mother and child, were footprints far larger than any previously seen by local law enforcement officers. You know what they say about big feet, right? Big socks, of course, get your mind out of the gutter. Anyways, a few weeks later, this peeping Tom would return, actually attempting to pull a child from its room and out of a window. And upon the arrival of law enforcement, they would be met with a strange report detailing how this man who tried to abduct them was not only incredibly strong, but also incredibly hairy. There was also one supposed eyewitness account by one Jack D. in 1981, in which Jack claimed he saw some sort of large ape-like creature in a tree near the modern-day Sinatra Drive in Hoboken, making it seem increasingly credible that whatever was being reported right across the river from the Big Apple was not just some dressed-up man, but perhaps a cousin of Bigfoot that had decided he was too sophisticated for his rural life he'd become so used to, and had taken to the city to fulfill his desire for overpriced lattes, wearing skinny jeans and complaining about rent instead. Beyond this, there were more strange rumors, like that this monkey man had visited a school, going so far as to assault a teacher in its quest to abduct kids, and that he may have even come from the Pine Barrens in southern Jersey, but none of these, of course, could be confirmed at the time or can be now. So with all of these rumors in mind, is it true? Was there a monkey man roaming the streets of Hoboken in the 80s, and could his presence persist into modern day? In short, according to many prominent members of the Hoboken community, not quite. For instance, in a Hudson Reporter article on the case, one man, James Farina, a city clerk and former president of Hoboken's Board of Education, said that despite their role in education for decades, they'd never heard of this monkey man terrorizing students. Beyond this, you'd think the police would have heard of the monkey man if they'd been responding to calls about it so often for a period of time. But local law enforcement have no record of the monkey man ever existing. One Sergeant Michael Costello of the Hoboken Police was even an officer back in the early 80s, and he remarked that he had never heard of this so-called monkey man. With this lack of credible evidence in mind, most point to the ongoing string of kidnappings in Atlanta as perhaps maybe motivation for the Hoboken residents to concoct their own wives' tale of sorts, of a creature prowling the streets posing a threat to the children. Also, it's worth noting this rumor isn't some modern phenomenon. It really did exist, though it was certainly more urban legend than true fear. For instance, one Maria De Bendito, in the same Hudson Reporter article, remarked that when she was a kid, she was pretty scared of the monkey man, and that people in the area, in particular in the downtown area, would warn young folks that the monkey man would get them if they were out too late. Also, she remarked that if you saw someone that was creepy or ugly, folks would often say, "Oh crud, look, it's the monkey man." Some rumors even said it was some dude wearing a mask that would abduct kids, and it was actually more human than monkey. So yeah, no offense to Hoboken, but if there's a place for a cryptid to hide out, it's probably not in a city where parking is a bigger nightmare than any mythical ape man could be. You might be able to convince me that a monkey man existed in the Florida Everglades, or perhaps the dense forests of the Northeast or Pacific Northwest, but I'm sorry to say it, there are likely no monkey men running around Hoboken. With this in mind, though, let me know if you heard of the monkey man. Were you warned about it? Did you think you saw it? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. On October 22nd of 1830, an article was published in the Pennsylvania Gazette making interesting claims. This article recounted witch trials, and not merely the same trials that occurred in Salem just 38 years earlier. Rather, this article spoke of trials that took place in Mount Holly, New Jersey. This whole debacle, according to the article, began in classic old-timey witch hunt fashion. Witches, back in the day, didn't take their jobs lightly. They weren't just out there pulling minor party tricks, no floating spoons, or casually turning water into an oaky Chardonnay. No, if they were gonna witch, they were gonna witch. Therefore, true to form, in this case, the accused party apparently managed to make their neighbor's sheep begin to dance and to cause the hogs belonging to this neighbor to speak and sing psalms, from the Bible. I quote, "to the great terror and amazement of the king's good and peaceable subjects in this province." I've heard a lot of people talk about what they'd do if they saw pigs fly, and I can't imagine the reaction one would have to a pig speaking from psalms. Anyways, the only logical response to this, of course, is to conduct the classic foolproof and scientific tests for witchcraft that have been passed down and validated in peer-reviewed journals for generations. The first of these tests would be to weigh people against Bibles. They would run this test on the accused, but also on two random members of the mob. Back then, the cutting-edge science of witch detection dictated that Bibles were somehow heavier than anyone harboring the dark arts. And so naturally, they plopped the accused on gallows and weighed them against the Holy Scripture because, logic. And strangely, these people would all be proven to weigh more than Bibles, the accused and random members of the mob alike. But it couldn't be that witches aren't real. Rather, the test must have been faulty or the witchcraft strong, so the crowd of 300 people demanded a second test, which can be aptly described as the age-old question, are witches ducks? In this test, they would rip the clothes from these dastardly witches and their controls and toss all four of them one by one into a nearby pond. Funny enough, of the four, the only one of them to sink and pass as a non-witch would be one of those that was not accused who was also a member of the mob. Otherwise, three of the individuals would float and therefore were possibly witches, but at the very least, they were ducks. And the mob would supposedly claim that one of these women must have simply been cursed by the witches. Now, if you are to believe that this article is factual and recounting real events, it said that the mob was confused more than convicted by the end of this whole episode, and they resigned to trying this whole exercise again once the weather warmed up. So this is a very fun tale, but did it actually happen, or was it a fantasy crafted by the hands of someone we've heard about before? See, while it cannot be definitively proven if we are to believe one John Bach McMaster, it is thought by some that this article was written by someone well-known, someone who enjoyed a good laugh, and perhaps enjoyed laughing at some local folk beliefs at the expense of local rural townspeople. This person, of course, is Benjamin Franklin, who is possibly making his second appearance in just one video. So did this ridiculous episode actually happen? Well, they think most likely no. The prevailing theory is that Ben Franklin, yes, that Ben Franklin, crafted the whole thing as an elaborate joke, just like he mocked the astrology-driven almanac of the Leeds family. Because when Benjamin Franklin wasn't busy founding nations, inventing bifocals, or flying kites in thunderstorms, he was out there absolutely roasting rural New Jersey for sport. Sorry folks, don't shoot the messenger, old Ben did this one. The month was June of 2017. A family named the Broadduses, Derek, Maria, and their 3 children, who were of ages 5, 8, and 10, had just closed on a house located at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey. This home was well out of my price range, boasting 6 bedrooms and a hefty price tag of about $1.3 million, an amount that was even over the asking price, which likely buried the family under a mountain of debt, but more on that later. The house also held sentimental value for Maria, as it was close to her parents and near where she grew up. Now here's where things got a little bit weird. The very day after closing, the Broadduses started renovations. And my friends who own homes tell me that jumping straight into renovations is a nightmare. Permits, contractors, and a whole lot of waiting. So either this family had the most efficient paperwork process known to mankind, or something was up with that. Then, before they even moved in, they got mail. A letter simply addressed to the new owners read, "Dearest new neighbors at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to this neighborhood. How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father in the 1960s. It is now my time." If it were me, immediate response would be, "Great, we've got a neighborhood lunatic," but it got worse. The letter told them to watch the passing cars into the nearby windows, implying that the so-called watcher might be lurking nearby. Maybe even inside one of those houses. And then came the real kicker. "You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested?" Because, sure, nothing says friendly new neighbor like demanding a fresh supply of young blood. Naturally, Derek called the police over, who read the letter and were just as creeped out. The Broadduses also asked the previous owners if they'd ever received anything like this. They claimed no, except for one letter right before they moved. They shrugged it off, saying they never felt watched or threatened, and even opted for a quiet sale with no sign in the yard. Their reason for moving, according to them, was that their kids had moved out, and the house was too big, which is, in my opinion, reasonable enough. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one got even more personal, listing the family members by name, mentioning their kids' age and somehow their nicknames. The watcher also mentioned seeing the daughter painting in the house, which was only visible from a neighbor's vantage point. More on that later. Adding to the creep factor, Derek recalled that during renovations, a neighbor dropped by and casually remarked, "It'll be nice to have young blood in the neighborhood." No one ever identified who said this, but at this point I would have gone full Reggie White and tackled somebody. Understandably, the Broadduses decided not to move in, and they kept their kids away from the house. Then came a third letter, ominously asking where they'd gone. Meanwhile, the police investigation went nowhere, and paranoia set in. With no other options, the family tried selling the home, unsuccessfully of course, and they even sued the previous owners, which attracted a local reporter who published excerpts of the letter, making the whole ordeal public. They also attempted to split the lot, perhaps making it less appealing to the watcher, but zoning laws blocked the move. Oddly enough, a similar exception had been granted the neighborhood before, but not for them. Finally, in 2016, the Broadduses found renters under the agreement that they could break the lease if another letter came. Of course, another letter did come. This one was unhinged. It called Maria a wench and dubbed the neighbors the soldiers of the boulevard. The Soldiers of the Boulevard, what is this, Stepford meets Hot Fuzzes for the greater good? The letter even included the phrase, "All hail the Watcher," before rattling off potential fates for the family, ranging from car accidents to poison. Despite this, the renters decided to stay, though they did install more cameras, which honestly is the bare minimum move here. Now let's get into the real fun, the whodunit. The first suspect I'll call the creepy boyfriend. He was a young man that was spotted outside of the house, seemingly watching the home, but it turns out he was just the boyfriend of a local woman, and he was driving her car. He actually lived in the neighborhood and was into, I quote, dark video games, and skipped a police interview when he was called to one. Now I should admit, I love a good horror game, so I'm not convinced on this one. Living nearby and liking creepy media doesn't make you a suspect, it just makes you similar to me, I guess, and I'm not watching anybody, at least as far as I can tell. The second suspect I'll call the neighbor who liked to stare. This was one of the next door neighbors who lived with his elderly mother and had been in the house since the 1960s. That relates to one of the letters, by the way. He was known for peering into people's windows and wandering through their yards. He also had the vantage point to see inside of the Broaddus's home and watch the children play. As I mentioned before, someone would have been watching the daughter paint, and he would have been able to see that. Now, I don't want to say this guy was sus, as the kids say, but if someone told me unironically he owned binoculars for neighborhood appreciation, I'd probably believe it. And on to suspect number 3, which I will say is the Broadduses themselves. Could they have been writing letters? Some people think so. The family had moved up over the years, going from a $300,000 house to this $1.3 million home, refinancing along the way, and they'd done this in only a matter of a few years. Maybe, some think, they got in over their heads financially and needed an escape plan. However, the whole ordeal only tanked their property value. Suspiciously, too, when the neighborhood blocked their attempt to split the lot, some residents received threatening letters from friends of the Broaddus family. And guess what? Derek Broaddus eventually admitted to writing these letters. He swore, though, it was the only time he'd ever sent anonymous letters, but to that I have to say, oh sure, Derek, you only wrote threatening anonymous letters that one time, and I always eat healthy meals while my wife is out of town on work trips. In the end, we don't have a definitive answer to this one. The Watcher was never caught, and the case remains one of modern suburbia's strangest myths. So anyways, who do you think was behind it? Was the Watcher even real, or was it the Broadduses themselves? Regardless, drop your theories down below. Now, to be abundantly clear, this mystery I'm about to tell is, if true, one of the most baffling things I've seen committed to the pages of a newspaper. As the story goes, on August 2nd of 1970 in Caldwell, New Jersey, there was some sort of silver or translucent thread that was simply hanging from the sky over the homes of Mr. and Mrs. A.P. Smith at 85 4th Street. It was actually not the owner of the home that first noticed this strange thread, but rather their neighbors, and eventually efforts to identify the thread went as far as the local police, who seemed to settle on the thread actually hanging down from a cloud above the home. Now here's where things start to tickle my "this is made up" meter, because apparently rather than call some government agency, because this was clearly amazing, the folks settled on the theory that it was either, I quote, a direct line from the Martians or a line that dropped from a blimp. This thread was not extremely pliable, by the way. It wasn't a rope or a string, rather reports say it was fairly rigid with about 2 pounds strength. Apparently, this thread would migrate across the city, too, across the houses of the Forest and Hillside neighborhood for about a week, but eventually it would be lost. I don't entirely know what this means, but the article ends by stating that the thread, I quote, became loose and disappeared, and I guess they got a hold of some of it because at least part of it was supposedly brought to DuPont, but the company couldn't determine anything about it. This is at least what the story says. Now, I'll admit, I couldn't scarcely find anything linked to this case beyond the thread article itself, but stick around, I found some stuff that was fairly interesting. Apparently, John Keel, a prominent UFO investigator, managed to get and to observe this thread, and one Dr. Bertolt Schwartz also saw it, noting that it seemed to come from and go to nowhere. Also, Pursuit magazine also covered this case, calling them skylines in a 1971 article, and also found more cases where mysterious threads were coming to the ground from the sky. Also, apparently this article revealed that the line in question in Caldwell was pulled on by some local kids until snapping, and then sent to DuPont and found to be made of nylon, per DuPont, rather than the often reported unidentifiable material. Additionally, as I said, there were more mysterious sky threads too. For instance, in Blakedale, South Carolina, there was a strange string, sort of like that affixed to a kite, that apparently drifted across town one day, with its origin being somewhere in the sky. That being said, from what I can tell, this account is based purely on the account of children, so take this with a grain of salt. There were also similar reports that occurred in Georgia that were reported on in 1973 by Fate magazine, and a report that supposedly placed some weird sky thread at Stonehenge in 1976. So with all of this in mind, what do you think? Do you think the sky threads were real, or do you think they were a 1970s phenomena that were largely motivated by the first of these events in Caldwell? Frankly, I find this whole saga interesting, but as always, I'm sure there's more information than I can find online, and I'd love to hear it in the comments. There may very well be nothing I love more than a weird story, but if there is, it's a strange tradition, and here in New Jersey, you've got just that. See, strange as it may be, every single baseball, every single one that's used in the MLB, well, they happen to carry with them a tiny piece of New Jersey. As the story goes, this tradition started back in 1938. It was around this time that an umpire, they say, would tell one Lena Blackburn of New Jersey, a coach for the Philadelphia Atlantics, that the balls just weren't doing it for him. See, back in the 1930s, balls were quote-unquote prepared for the games by using mud made from the dust of the baseball diamond where they were on right then and there. The reason this is done is because when a baseball is brand new, it has a nice clean surface that's sort of shiny, even slippery. But if you rub a bit of mud on this fresh ball, it gets a bit more grippy. Therefore, it has been long practiced to muddy a baseball up before a game. Regardless, the variability in how these balls turned out just wasn't cutting the mustard, and some of these mud concoctions would even soften the cover of the baseballs. A change was needed, one that would take the shine off of the balls and simultaneously keep the cover intact. And funny enough, Lena Blackburn had a solution in mind. See, it said after this talk with the umpire, Lena went back home to Burlington County, New Jersey, and he would prowl the banks of the Delaware River, and in his prowling, he would come across a mud hole, and in his eyes, the texture of this mud was absolutely perfect. In one article I read describing this tale, it was like that of a thick, grainy chocolate mousse. Anyways, he would retrieve a good portion of this mud and bring it back to the field where the baseball games were held, and would get down to rubbing balls in mud. And as it turned out, this Delaware River mud was just what the doctor ordered. The umpire that previously complained was impressed with the new texture, and suddenly, Lena Blackburn had a new side hustle: mud supply. This business would eventually grow though, and the whole league would come to hear of this beautiful texture of this mud, and it would go on to be rubbed on the balls of all of the minor and major league baseball games in the entire USA. Today, this practice lives on, and it's said that every July, a crew of individuals who this business was passed down to will travel down to the same mud hole found by Lena and collect enough of this so-called magic mud for a season of baseball. Throughout New Jersey, even just a handful of miles from Manhattan, you'll find something interesting scattered across the landscape. Doors that clearly were designed to drop down to hatches that led underground, and perhaps in some cases there might even be a long-lost surface-to-air missile lying in wait, just waiting to be found. Although this last part is slightly unlikely. If you don't know already, I'm speaking about the abandoned Nike missile bases. At their peak, there were over 300 of these bases scattered throughout the USA, where some conventional explosives and some with nuclear warheads literally larger than those dropped on Hiroshima were kept and readied for a potential attack against an incoming enemy aircraft fleet. Also, it's worth being noted, these bases weren't necessarily isolated. In one case noted in a weird New Jersey video posted 18 years ago, they noted that there was a playground for children in a neighborhood, and less than 100 yards away their fathers might have been underground and ready to launch a nuclear missile. Largely, too, the public wasn't aware of the location of these missile bases. Often, these bases, as I stated, would be right behind humble suburban communities, or perhaps in riskier cases, they'd be right behind a local school. As for where these bases were positioned, they ranged from being right outside of Philly to right outside of Manhattan, like 25 miles from Manhattan. and technology inside could actually show the track of the missile and the track of incoming aircraft in the event that a Nike missile had to be fired and guided to approach the craft. So as for the origin of this missile program, as you might expect, it was peak Cold War goodness. During the 1960s and 70s, at the height of the Cold War between the US and the USSR, Nike missile bases dotted the landscapes across suburban New Jersey like many other states. This program was named after Nike, the Greek goddess of victory, and the project was originally proposed at the end of World War II by Bell Laboratories as an anti-aircraft system. Project Nike became the first operational air defense system in the USA and was armed with supersonic, radar-guided missiles like the Nike Ajax and later the Nike Hercules to protect strategic cities and areas across the country against Soviet nuclear attacks. Today, traces of these bases can be seen throughout the USA, and these traces are particularly abundant in New Jersey because of its proximity to Philly and New York City. New Jersey, with this in mind, was home to 14 Nike missile bases which were built to protect Philadelphia and New York City. These bases were located all over the state, like literally all over it, and formed a sort of arc around New York City that continued with other bases into upstate New York. The missiles, some with nuclear warheads, would be guided by radar, as I said, and were designed to intercept and destroy incoming air squadrons headed to New York City. The main advantage over conventional anti-aircraft artillery was that, as I alluded to earlier, the Nike missiles could be continuously guided to intercept an attacking aircraft in spite of any evasive maneuvers taken by the pilot. And while in operation, those government installations were heavily guarded and completely off limits to the public. However, the number of operational Nike bases throughout the continental USA were steadily reduced starting in the late 1960s, and in 1974, the nationwide Nike Air Defense System was inactivated in favor of a new kind of weapon, the ICBM missile. The Army Air Defense Command, which administered this system, was closed down shortly thereafter. In the wake of this inactivation, most of the Nike bases present across the USA had been abandoned or redeveloped, though one base in Livingston has been preserved and opened to the public as Riker Hill Park, and it includes a number of artist studios. The Marlton base has since been converted to a Tony Briarwood housing development. The Nike base in Swedesboro, which at the time contained nuclear warheads and was operational until 1974, was put up for sale in 2020. Arbach Partners, a New Jersey City-based industrial development firm, bought the base for $2.7 million and is in the process of developing it into a warehouse distribution center. Also, perhaps it's worth noting, according to an interview with the one-time commander of the Livingston East Hanover Nike facility, Colonel Joseph Evangelist, these defenses in New Jersey were extensive. For instance, in an interview, he was asked about the East Hanover Arsenal, and it was noted that it was a dual site of Nike Ajax and Hercules. It had 6 magazine rooms, or kits as they called them, and each kit had 4 launchers. The missiles inside were kept in underground pits that had about 8 to 10 foot thick walls, with their own independent power sources, and these missiles had warheads in their noses and center bodies, and at the smallest were about 27 feet tall. And other than these two I mentioned, what became of the underground bunkers where the missiles were stored? Well, as I've kind of hinted at, measures were largely taken to ensure that they wouldn't cave in. Then the openings were welded shut, in large part after the warheads were either removed or disarmed. As I've said, the walls of those things were 8 to 10 feet thick, so I suppose that these empty chasms, which once held a plethora of explosives, are still down there, waiting for someone to stumble upon them. So if you've watched The X-Files, this story that I'm about to tell you that is supposedly true would fit smack dab in the middle of an episode in Season 1. Heck, it could have even been the pilot episode. As the story goes, in the early hours of January 18th of 1978, I kid you not, an alien was allegedly shot and killed at the McGuire Air Force Base. Accounts of this UFO incident describe the story as follows. This episode starts when supposedly multiple UFOs were seen over McGuire Air Force Base and Fort Dix around New Hanover, New Jersey in the early morning hours of January 18th of 1978. During these sightings, a Fort Dix military policeman named John Samuels would chase an object that was hovering over his patrol vehicle. He would describe this craft as shaped like an oval and emitting a bluish-greenish glow. Of course, as these stories always go, a creature would then appear near his vehicle, which Samuels described as being 4 feet tall, gray-brown in color, with a large head, long arms, and a thin body. From the accounts I'm reading, it does sort of sound like this creature was already outside of the aircraft rather than abruptly exiting targeting it and approaching Samuel. Now, Samuel, being a good American, would immediately blast the creature with 5 rounds of his .45. The creature would then flee towards the fence separating McGuire Air Force Base and Fort Dix. But if you buy the story, it didn't make it far. Soon after, the creature was found deceased on a runway near an unused hangar in the McGuire Air Force Base side of the fence by an Air Force security guard and a New Jersey state police officer. It was said that the creature gave off a horrible ammonia-like stench. Afterwards, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations took over. High-level Blue Berets, or members of an elite Air Force group or perhaps high-ranking military police, roped off the area and barred anyone from approaching, civilian or military. Later, a team from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, which, as we've discussed, is a hub for these stories of extraterrestrial visitation, arrived in a C-141 and removed the body. Maybe this is why kids think Ohio is weird. UFOlogists who have written about this incident cite the account of Jeffrey Morse, an Air Force security officer who claimed that he'd seen the dead creature on the runway. Morse is also said to have provided a copy of the incident complaint report, a standard DD 1569 form that detailed the night's events. Morse said that all the personnel were threatened to be court-martialed if they said anything about this encounter, and he said that after the incident, he and 2 other witnesses were flown to Wright-Patterson, where they were interrogated by the military and civilian officials, signed forms swearing them to secrecy, and were quickly transferred to a separate base overseas. Morse was sent to Okinawa, Japan, and he would later claim that his decision to come forward with this story resulted in government surveillance and intimidation, including interference with his ability to obtain government jobs after the conclusion of his military service, which is, frankly, in my eyes, a pretty mundane punishment if you ask me. Oh no, I talked about aliens and now I can't work for the IRS, whatever will I do? Now, eventually, this account by Jeffrey Morse of the incident made its way to Leonard Stringfield, along with his colleague, former Assistant Director of NICAP, or the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, Richard Hall. Stringfield and Hall would interview Morse over the next few years. They found Morse to be credible and consistent in his story. Stringfield, because of this, would write about the incident in his 1985 work, The Fatal Encounter at Fort Dix, McGuire, a case study. Status Report 4. Hall was able to authenticate all but one of the officers that Morse said interrogated him at Wright-Patterson, including a brigadier general, although information about their assignments at the time of the supposed interrogation was unavailable. Morse also was able to dig up what he claimed was the incident complaint report, the DD Form 1569, that McGuire security police had prepared about the shooting. In other words, he found the report that Morse had supposedly submitted talking about the alien encounter. This report was directed towards Colonel Landon, commanding officer of McGuire Air Force Base, Brigadier General Brown, and the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, according to Stringfield. The report also listed Morse and the other security policemen involved, as well as the Fort Dix MP, who shot the strange being. Stringfield omitted their names from the copy of the incident report he revealed in his 1985 paper on the matter, though, and Morse had already blocked out the social security numbers listed next to the individuals to protect their privacy. And while that's an honorable act for sure, without that information, Hall could not confirm the identities and assignments of the enlisted men. In addition, in his report, Stringfield noted, other than the incident complaint report, which provided names, no other person has responded to Morse's request for backup testimony. I will admit that's kinda fishy. While I get that folks might largely keep quiet about such an important incident, you'd think that at least a small fraction of these individuals would be motivated to come forward and corroborate Morse directly. Another account of the incident comes from retired U.S. Air Force Major George A. Flyer, who recounted the story in the 2018 book Strangecraft, the true story of an Air Force intelligence officer's life with UFOs. At the time, 1978, Flyer was stationed at McGuire Air Force Base as an intelligence officer, though he was not an eyewitness to the incident. He later became the Eastern Director for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, we've talked about it before, and a member of the Disclosure Project. Filer, at one point, would actually give an account of his job at the base and the event in question in the following quote. "My job was to brief the generals every morning," Filer said. "Briefings were like giving them the morning news, only it's news that's classified." On the day in question, he arrived at the base at 4 a.m., his usual time, although he quickly noticed that something was amiss. He saw flashing lights of emergency vehicles near a runway, and the gate guards, who usually waved him through, stopped him and asked him for his identification. When he got to his office, things were a lot more active than usual too, and that was when a sergeant took him aside and plainly told him an alien was shot and is dead on the runway. This, of course, flabbergasted Filer, who responded, "You mean an alien, like a Mexican alien?" But the sergeant would clarify, no, this thing's from, outer space. They want you to brief General Sadler. Filer would again respond, "It's a joke, right?" Further clarifying that the sergeant didn't really have much of a sense of humor, and would go on to make calls inquiring about an intruder that was shot and killed on base. Of course, everyone he called on base would essentially clarify that they believed there was a deceased alien on the base runway. Now, as noted, it was Filer who was tasked with informing Major General Thomas Sadler about the incident. Filer interviewed the Air Force personnel who participated in the incident, but not the Army side, including the MP who supposedly shot the alien. He claimed that photographs were taken of the body, but he was prevented from viewing them. And when Filer had completed his report and arrived to brief Sadler, the commander of the 438th Security Police Squadron told Filer that he had already been briefed, and the general and Filer need not bother talking together. Sadler still waved Filer in, and the intelligence office presented his read-only report. Filer separately has claimed that he was told not to give the briefing because it was, I quote, "too hot." In 2000, the case would again be investigated by the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS. NIDS investigators were able to follow up on the prior story and confirm that the aforementioned Morse worked as an airman E4 at McGuire Air Force Base, but they were unable to locate him for an interview. They also could not find Samuels, the man who was said to have shot the alien. NIDS did contact several Air Force officials who were assigned to McGuire Air Force Base at the time of the incident, including the base commander, who was noted in the incident report as having investigated the shooting, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, a FOSI detachment commander, and the 21st Air Force commander. NIDS investigator, Roger Pinson, reported all four of these people on the base in 1978 would have known of a UFO sighting, but none of them claimed to know anything about the alleged sighting or alien close encounter. Though, again, they could have been dutifully keeping a secret. In addition, none of these men recalled working with a Filer. NIDS also contacted a retired Judge Advocate General Colonel whom Morse claimed had interrogated and debriefed him at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The officer confirmed he had been a JAG at McGuire Air Force Base at the time of the incident, but had never heard of this situation and had never been to Wright-Patterson, and that he also had no knowledge of anyone named Morse being interrogated. Based on its investigation, NIDS hypothesized that the 1978 McGuire Air Force Base incident did not happen. For their part, U.S. Air Force officials say there's no evidence of such an incident at McGuire Air Force Base. The civilian base historian has also said that many people have contacted the base over the years trying to get records about the incident, but it's, I quote, complete fiction. The Air Force claims they cannot find Jeff Morse, and the incident report has many inaccuracies, including the base's chain of command and its zip code. The incident remains a controversial event to this day, with no conclusive evidence on either side of the story, but let me know in the comments, do you buy it? Do you think that an alien was slain on US soil right here? New Jersey, I had a heck of a time with you here, and I am happy to report that despite having like 3 X-Files adjacent stories, I was blown away and surprised by your lore. Also, don't forget, if you enjoyed this, I may make y'all a comprehensive video of your haunted places and a part 2 of this video. So let me know in the comments if that's what you'd like to see and what you think I should cover next. And hey, if you enjoyed the ride, hitting like and subscribing helps me get one step closer to my goal of 100,000 subs in 2025. Seriously, it's free, quick, and lets YouTube know that this is the kind of content you'd like to see more of. Now, as for what's next, well, there's a little state north of DC that I've been meaning to cover that I've heard has a thing with crabs, and I'm hoping to put out a few part 2s before I move on to a couple of other states I haven't covered yet. So stay tuned for that and let me know what you'd like to see. And remember, most importantly, whether you just watched a security guard blast away poor little E.T., or if you saw Bigfoot at Cafexico in downtown Hoboken while wearing a pair of skinny jeans, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.